There's a type of man that makes people deeply uncomfortable. He doesn't chase you. He doesn't need your approval. He doesn't fight for a spot at the table. And when someone takes his seat, he just finds another room. Most people can't explain why he unsettles them, but today, we're going to. What you're about to hear isn't about dominance, it's not about being cold or detached. And it's definitely not a trend or a label someone slapped on a personality quiz. This is about a very specific psychological pattern, a way of moving through the world that most people have never seen up close, and when they do, they don't quite know what to do with it. We're talking about the Sigma male, not the version that gets mocked in memes, the real version, the psychology behind it, why it works, why it scares people, and why, once you understand it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Let's get into it. 1. Why does he bother you? Think about someone you've met who just didn't need anything from you. Not in a rude way, not in a dismissive way. They were perfectly pleasant to talk to, but there was something about the interaction that left you slightly off balance, like you were waiting for them to want something, approval, agreement, a reaction, and it never came. That feeling you had, that's not random. That's your psychology running a program. It runs with almost every social interaction you have, and for the first time, the program got no response back. Here's what I mean. Most social interaction runs on a silent exchange system. You give a little, they give a little. You make a joke, they laugh. You share an opinion, they agree or push back. You project confidence, they project it back or submit to it. This exchange is invisible, but it's constant. It's how most people measure where they stand with each other. The Sigma male doesn't play that game. Not because he's above it in an arrogant sense, but because he genuinely doesn't register it as necessary. He's not scanning your face for approval signals. He's not keeping score of the social exchange. He walked into the room with his value already decided by himself a long time ago, and that's what breaks people's brains. When you try to do the normal dance and the other person just walks in a straight line, you stumble, because the entire social script assumes both people are playing. When one person isn't playing, the other person loses the map. And here's the really interesting part. Most people don't respond to that by thinking, oh, interesting, he's self-contained. They respond by feeling something closer to irritation, or suspicion, or a strange kind of threat. That's what we need to understand. Because the Sigma male isn't doing anything hostile, but people treat him like he is. Why? 2. The psychology of needlessness. Let me paint a picture for you. You have two men walk into a networking event. The first man works the room. He shakes hands, makes jokes, remembers names, does everything right. He's warm, he's likable, and by the end of the night, everyone knows who he is. He needs the room to validate the effort he put in. He wants people to leave thinking he's impressive, and they do. The second man? He talks to maybe 3 people, not because he's shy, not because he's awkward. He's just selective. He stays in a conversation long enough to find out if it's worth continuing. If it is, he's completely present. If it isn't, he politely moves on. He doesn't do the rounds. He doesn't perform. He leaves when he decides the evening is done, without making an announcement about it. Now, here's the question. Which one makes people more curious? Almost always, it's the second guy, and the reason is psychologically fascinating. Human beings are wired to want what seems hard to get, not because they're shallow, but because scarcity signals value. We've been running that program since before we had language. Rare things matter. Easily available things become background noise. When someone is visibly trying to win your approval, your subconscious registers them as needy of your attention. That automatically drops their perceived value. Not because you're cruel, you probably don't even notice it happening. It's just the wiring. But when someone is clearly not trying to win your approval, the question becomes, why not? What do they have that means they don't need me? And suddenly you're curious about them. You want to figure them out. The Sigma male isn't creating this effect on purpose. He's not playing games. He genuinely has no interest in performing for the room. He's there for a reason, a specific conversation, a specific outcome, and he's focused on that. The effect on others is a byproduct, not a goal. But that byproduct is powerful. Now let's go deeper, because this isn't just about being quiet at parties. 3. Where this comes from. The Sigma origin. Most people assume that someone who doesn't need external validation just hasn't found the right kind of validation yet. like the need is in there somewhere, and once they find their people, they'll finally open up and become normal. That's not what's happening with a Sigma male. The Sigma's relationship with self-sufficiency usually comes from somewhere specific. It's built. Sometimes it's built through necessity, periods of life where no support structure existed, so they built their own. Sometimes it's built through repeated observation, watching people who chase status and approval end up hollow or manipulated, and deciding quietly that they'd never do the same. Sometimes it's built through a personality that was always more comfortable alone, not because of fear, but because solitude was genuinely productive rather than painful. Here's what all three paths have in common. At some point, the Sigma male had to decide what he actually valued. And the answer that came back wasn't other people's opinions. It wasn't rank. It wasn't being liked. The answer was clarity, autonomy, and results. Once you internalize those three things, the social hierarchy games that consume most people's energy just become noise. Not threatening noise, just noise. And this is where it gets really interesting from a psychological standpoint. Most men who exist in traditional hierarchies, alpha-style structures, corporate ladders, social pecking orders, are actually deeply anxious. They just express that anxiety through dominance behavior. They maintain their position by keeping others below them, by challenging rivals, by performing confidence for an audience. That works. It absolutely works in human social structures, but it has a hidden cost. It requires constant maintenance. The alpha needs the hierarchy to function. Remove the hierarchy, and the structure collapses. The Sigma doesn't need the hierarchy at all, which means you can't manipulate him through it. You can't threaten his position because he doesn't have a position he's defending. You can't exclude him from the group because he wasn't dependent on the group for his identity. That's not coldness, that's freedom. But it looks like coldness to people who can't imagine not needing the group. 4. The 6 things that make him threatening. Let's be specific, because the Sigma male label gets thrown around a lot, and most of the time it gets applied wrong. To people who are just antisocial or bitter or emotionally closed off, that's not a Sigma, that's a wound. A real Sigma isn't closed, he's just selective. There's a massive difference. So what are the actual traits that trigger fear or discomfort in other people? 1. He doesn't react the way you expect. Normal social dynamics run on predictable reactions. Push someone, they push back or they fold. Criticize someone, they defend themselves or they apologize. The Sigma's reactions don't follow that script. He might absorb a challenge without blinking. He might ignore a jab completely. He might respond thoughtfully when everyone expected anger. The unpredictability isn't strategic. It's a result of genuine security, but to the person trying to read him, it's deeply unsettling. You can't get traction. You can't find the lever. 2. His mood doesn't depend on the room. Most people's emotional state is partly crowdsourced. Good energy in the room, you feel good. Tension in the room, you feel it too. This is normal. Humans are deeply social, but the Sigma walks in with his own weather system. If he's calm, he stays calm regardless of what's happening around him. If he's focused, external noise doesn't pull him off track. This reads as aloofness to people who expect emotional mirroring, but it's actually regulation, a developed ability to maintain internal state regardless of context. 3. He doesn't compete for things that don't matter to him. Put a Sigma in a room with men competing for status, showing off, one-upping each other, peacocking for whoever's watching, and he just doesn't play. This confuses people. The assumption is that everyone wants to win those games. When someone opts out, others assume it means they know they'd lose. So they dismiss the Sigma as weak, or oblivious, or unconfident. Then later they notice that the Sigma achieved something real while they were busy competing over perception. That recalibration is uncomfortable. 4. He's comfortable with silence. This is a small thing that reveals a lot. Most people are afraid of conversational silence. They'll fill it with noise, with filler words, with unnecessary agreement just to avoid the gap. The Sigma sits in silence without flinching. This makes the other person in a conversation feel exposed, because silence in conversation forces you to take a turn, and a Sigma who genuinely doesn't feel the need to fill space gives you nowhere to hide. You suddenly have to say something real or nothing at all. 5. He can walk away from almost anything: jobs, relationships, situations, conversations, not with drama, just quietly, when it stops serving something he values. This terrifies people who've built their identity around keeping specific things in their life, because the Sigma's willingness to leave puts them face to face with the possibility that the thing they're clutching isn't as necessary as they thought. He's not trying to make a point. He's just living out a different relationship with attachment, but it holds a mirror up, and not everyone likes what they see. 6. He doesn't need you to understand him. This might be the biggest one. Most people need, on some level, to be understood. They want someone to get them, and so they explain themselves, they justify their choices, they seek acknowledgement that their position makes sense. The Sigma just acts. He doesn't need your understanding. He doesn't need your validation of his decisions. He made the decision with his own reasoning, and that's enough. This reads as arrogance to people who confuse confidence with dismissiveness, but it's actually just a man who doesn't experience approval as food. 5. The misreadings. Why people get him wrong. Here's where it gets nuanced, because the Sigma gets misread a lot, and the misreadings come from very understandable places. The first misreading is that he's cold, that he doesn't care about people. In reality, Sigmas often care very deeply, just about a smaller circle and in less performative ways. He won't tell a room full of people how much he values them, but the person he considers a close friend will get his full, undivided presence and a kind of loyalty that's genuinely rare. The difference is that he doesn't advertise it. There's no social return on investment in his emotional life. He gives because he chooses to, not because he's being watched. The second misreading is that he's weak, that he opts out of competition because he'd lose. This gets proven wrong slowly and sometimes embarrassingly for the people who assumed it. Sigmas tend to operate quietly and accumulate significantly. They're not wasting energy on battles that don't matter. So, when a battle does matter, when something real is at stake, they show up with a level of focus and capacity that surprises people who've mistaken their quietness for emptiness. The third misreading is that he's damaged, that his lack of social need comes from some wound that hasn't healed. This one's tricky because sometimes it's true. There are men who isolate not from strength, but from hurt, and on the surface, they can look Sigma, but there's a tell. A man operating from a wound is still reactive. He flinches at closeness. He gets defensive about his aloneness. He needs people to agree that he's fine. A true Sigma doesn't need you to know he's fine. He just is fine. The fourth misreading, and maybe the most interesting, is that he's trying to be mysterious. He's not. The mystery is a side effect. When someone is genuinely comfortable in their own skin and not performing for an audience, they become naturally harder to read. Because all the social signals most people broadcast constantly, the little bids for connection and validation and acknowledgement, those are just absent. It reads as mystery, but from the inside, it's just quiet. 6. The social hierarchy problem. Let's talk about something that most Sigma male content gets completely wrong. The Sigma isn't at the top of a dominance hierarchy. He's not the alpha's bigger, quieter brother. He's outside the hierarchy. That's the point. And here's why that matters. Most social structures, workplaces, friend groups, even online communities, run on a status economy. Everyone has a rough idea of where they rank. That ranking comes from things like who talks most in meetings, who gets laughed at, whose opinion gets taken seriously, who the attractive people want to be around. People are constantly making micro moves to protect or improve their rank, often without realizing it. The Sigma doesn't invest in the status economy, not because he thinks he'd lose, because he doesn't see the return on investment. This creates a structural problem for the people who do invest. If your identity is partly built on your rank, and for most people it is to some degree, then someone who clearly doesn't care about your rank is a direct threat to the meaning of that rank, because rank only means something if everyone agrees to value it. The Sigma's refusal to play the game doesn't just opt him out, it casts doubt on the whole game. That doubt is deeply uncomfortable for people who've spent years climbing. Think about a middle manager who's worked hard to get where he is. He knows the rules. He plays them well. Then a new person joins the team who just works, doesn't politic, doesn't bid for visibility, doesn't manage upward, just produces results, and seems genuinely unbothered by where that puts him in the pecking order. The middle manager can't figure out how to place this person, and because he can't place them, he can't decide whether to feel superior or threatened. So he often lands on, this person is strange, this person is difficult, this person doesn't understand how things work. What he actually means is, this person doesn't understand how things work the way I need them to work, and that's the real fear, not the Sigma himself, but what he represents, the possibility that the game doesn't have to be played. 7. What Sigma energy actually looks like in real life. Let me bring this down to earth, because Sigma male has become a meme to the point where people forget it's describing a real pattern of behavior that real people exhibit. So, what does it actually look like on an average Tuesday? A Sigma wakes up with a clear idea of what he wants to get done, not from a list someone else made for him, not driven by urgency someone else manufactured. He has his own sense of priority, and he moves through the day according to that. He's not constantly checking for social cues. He's not reading the room to know how to feel. He decides how to feel, or more accurately, he just feels what he actually feels. And then he acts from that place. When someone tries to drag him into drama, he doesn't engage with the drama. Not because he's afraid of conflict, but because the drama doesn't connect to anything he values. He'll engage with real conflict, over real things, with real consequences. But performing outrage because someone expected him to? No. When someone challenges his confidence or tries to knock him down socially, he doesn't retaliate. He usually just doesn't react in a way that's satisfying to the challenger. And that non-reaction does more damage to the challenger's position than any comeback would. When he's in a relationship, he brings presence rather than performance. He's not constantly proving he's the right choice. He chose the relationship for real reasons, and he shows up with depth rather than display. The people he loves usually describe him as someone who made them feel seen in a way that was rare and real, even if he was sometimes difficult to fully understand. When he succeeds at something, there's no broadcast, no look at me moment. He logs the win internally, adjusts his understanding of what's possible, and moves to the next thing. He's not building an audience, he's building a life. 8. The fear from people who knew them. Here's something worth thinking about. Some of the deepest fear of the Sigma male doesn't come from strangers or social rivals. It comes from people who are close to them, partners, old friends, family members. Why? Because the Sigma's self-sufficiency forces the people around him to confront a question they usually avoid. What am I actually providing here? In most relationships, there's a comfort in being needed. You feel valuable because someone depends on you for something. Emotional support, social connection, practical help, a sense of identity. That dependence creates a bond, but it also creates leverage. If I give you what you need, you'll stay. The Sigma doesn't need those things the same way. He wants connection, but he's not dependent on it for his emotional survival. He's in relationships because he chooses them, not because he'd fall apart without them. That's beautiful, if you're secure enough to see it. A person who chooses you freely, without desperation or need, is a profound thing. But if your relationship is partly built on being needed, it's terrifying, because if he doesn't need you, he might just leave. And because you can't control his attachment through his need, you have no safety net. This is where the Sigma's self-containment gets called selfishness, or emotional unavailability, or commitment issues. Not because those things are true. The Sigma can be deeply committed when he's genuinely chosen something, but because his freedom of choice reads as a threat to people whose connection is built on necessity rather than preference. It exposes a fundamental question about any relationship. Are you here because you want to be, or because you feel like you have to be? The Sigma forces that question just by existing. 9. The misuse. Why this gets twisted. We can't have this conversation without acknowledging the dark side of the concept, because Sigma male gets used as a cover story. A lot. Men who are emotionally unavailable call it Sigma energy. Men who treat people badly and refuse to reflect on it call it not needing validation. Men who have no real depth or direction call their aimlessness independence. Men who are simply afraid of closeness describe their avoidance as self-sufficiency. That's not Sigma psychology. That's a wound wrapped in a label. The real tell is this: a Sigma's self-sufficiency makes his life better and tends to make the people who truly know him respect or admire him, even when he's hard to understand. A fake Sigma's self-sufficiency leaves a trail of people he's hurt, dismissed, or simply abandoned without cause. Strength doesn't need a victim. Independence that requires you to harm or diminish others to maintain it isn't independence. It's insecurity wearing the right costume. Real Sigma energy is quiet, consistent, and usually invisible from the outside. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to prove a point. And it definitely doesn't spend time explaining to others why it's superior. The loudest person in the room, claiming to be a Sigma, has already missed the point. 10. The climax. What really scares people we've been building to this, after everything we've talked about, the needlessness, the non-reaction, the quiet strength, the social hierarchy step out, what is the real thing that scares people about the Sigma male who needs nothing? It's this: he's proof that the thing you've been told you need, status, approval, belonging, rank, is optional. Most people have organized significant portions of their life around the pursuit of those things. They've made professional sacrifices to move up. They've changed how they dress, talk, and carry themselves to fit a group. They've stayed in relationships too long because the thought of being alone was scarier than the relationship being wrong. They've performed happiness, confidence, and success for an audience of people they're not sure they even like. And then they meet this man who hasn't done any of that, who isn't miserable, who isn't lonely, who isn't less than, if anything, he's more settled, more purposeful, more at ease than most people they know. And that creates a very specific kind of cognitive dissonance, because if he doesn't need those things and he's okay, then maybe the sacrifices weren't necessary. Maybe the game wasn't the only way. Maybe all that energy spent managing other people's perceptions could have gone somewhere else. That's not a comfortable thought. And rather than sit with it, most people turn it into a criticism of the Sigma. He's strange, he's antisocial, he's missing something, he'll realize eventually. He's not as happy as he looks. Anything to make the alternative go away, because if the alternative is real, if you genuinely can build a good life without playing the approval game, then what have you been doing all this time? That's the real threat. Not the man himself, the mirror he holds up without even trying. The takeaway. So what do we actually take from all this? The Sigma male who needs nothing isn't a threat. He's not mysterious for sport. He's not cold or broken or arrogant. He's a man who figured out, somewhere along the way, that his peace was worth more than other people's approval, that his time was more valuable than performances that served nothing real, that choosing things, deliberately, for his own reasons, felt better than drifting toward things because the group expected it, and the fear he triggers in others isn't really about him. It's about what he represents, the road not taken, the alternative that was always available, the quieter, more internal life that didn't require the constant performance most people accepted without question. Understanding him doesn't mean you have to become him. Not everyone is wired that way, and that's fine. But understanding the psychology, why he moves the way he moves, why he affects people the way he does, why the approval machine breaks down around him, gives you something useful. It gives you a clearer look at what you actually need versus what you've just been told you need. And that question, honestly, is worth sitting with, because the people who are most unsettled by the Sigma male who needs nothing, they usually sense, somewhere quiet and honest, that they need a little less than they've been acting like. The Sigma is just the one who found that out first. If this shifted something for you, hit subscribe and let the algorithm know this is the kind of content worth pushing. Drop a comment. What part of this hit you the most? And if you know someone who moves like this, share it with them. They probably won't ask you to.